So hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and today I'm going to be doing the Future Classics tag. This tag was created by Eric from The Lonesome Reader. I'll link his channel down below, and I was very kindly tagged by Olivia Pope. So there are 5 questions in this tag, and all of them revolve around books that you think might be classics in the future. Olivia said in her video that she was tagging me because she knows how much I love classics, but I actually found this tag quite hard to do and the questions quite hard to answer, because although I love reading classics a lot, I find it quite hard to imagine what books might be classics in the future. But there we go. Question number 1 is pick an established classic that you think will still be relevant in the future. So I have 2. I'm sure it will surprise no one if I tell you that both of them are by Charles Dickens, but neither is Our Mutual Friend, so there is a surprise. The first one is Hard Times, which I think is a really, really wonderful book and such a fascinating one of Dickens's most sort of philosophical books in many ways. Although I don't think it has the best plot of his novels, I think it very strongly puts across a particular argument which is really interesting. And basically Hard Times is about industrialisation, but it's also about the industrialisation of the mind and what happens to the way that people think when there are big social changes in society and how that can be dangerous. And although it is about the Victorian period and industrialisation, it's also very relevant to the modern day and to digitisation in terms of the way that technological changes affect how we think and how we bring up our children and the way that we interpret the world around us and what that might mean for creativity and imagination and so on. So I think that Hard Times is a book that will continue to be very, very relevant and remains as relevant today in digitisation as it was for industrialisation in the Victorian period. And then the other one is Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, which of everything that I'm mentioning in this video is the one I am most certain will go on to be a classic for a very, very long time. Partly because it is so established. Like, I feel like A Christmas Carol is probably, I almost want to say, the most established classic of British literature. Maybe even more than Shakespeare. Not more than Shakespeare as a whole, but more than any like individual Shakespeare work. A Christmas Carol is so well known and so well established as a classic. And also, although it is very charmingly Victorian, it's also kind of timeless. But the idea of Scrooge being visited by these ghosts of Christmas past, Christmas present and Christmas future, and what they teach him about life, I think has such a big hold on society and will continue to do so that this will remain a classic for a very, very long time. Also, the basic message of A Christmas Carol is just be nice to people. And I think that is a message that is certainly relevant today and will continue to be relevant in the future. Question number 2 is pick a recent book that you feel has gone under the radar but which you're confident will be a classic in the future. So, I'm going to say The Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling. Now I know that J.K. Rowling is obviously not remotely under the radar, but I do feel like The Casual Vacancy kind of passed a lot of people by. I don't hear very many people talk about it. I definitely don't know very many people who love it as much as I do, but I think it's absolutely brilliant. Unlike a lot of under the radar books, which however much they deserve to be classics, may just get forgotten because of J.K. Rowling's sort of clout and the popularity of Harry Potter. I don't think J.K. Rowling will go out of print for a long time, and so I think The Casual Vacancy has the potential of becoming a classic in a way that a lot of other books which have gone slightly under the radar don't. The Casual Vacancy is obviously nowhere near as popular as Harry Potter, but personally I like it more than Harry Potter and I love it, and I really want to get myself a physical copy, considering how much I love it and the fact that I'd really like to reread it. But I read it a few years ago and it blew me away. I also think that because it is a novel of social criticism, it will be quite interesting for people in the future to look back at a particular point in sort of early 21st century British society in the same way that we now like to look back at Dickens for his insights into the Victorian period. The Casual Vacancy is a wonderful book, and if you haven't read it, please do, because it's great. Question 3 is pick a title that won one of your favourite book prizes recently, which you think will still be lauded in 50 years' time. I had to think about this for a while. I'm gonna say The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton, which won the Booker Prize a couple of years ago. Not that the Booker Prize is necessarily one of my favourite prizes. I always follow it with interest, but it can be a bit too experimental for me at times. I have read some brilliant books that have won or been shortlisted or longlisted for the Booker, and also some ones that were not so great. Will Self's Umbrella? Don't do that to yourself. My favourite prize is probably the Costa Prize, but I feel like there are quite a lot of books that win the Costa Prize and then fall out of fashion and don't get spoken about as much. Also are possibly less likely to work their way into the canon because books that win the Man Booker Prize are possibly more likely to end up being studied in universities because of literariness, etc. Anyway, that's beside the point. But The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton is a wonderful, wonderful book. Massive, but amazing, and so utterly worth your time. I also think it's a very complex and rich and complicated book, which means I think it's the kind of book that would lend itself very well to be being studied at universities, and that is something that often kind of secures a place in the canon for books. I also just think it's such an interesting book with such wonderfully developed characters that it will be very interesting for writers as well as readers to see how Eleanor Catton does it. And also, it's historical fiction, which does mean it will kind of age fairly well as well. So there's that one. Question 4 is pick a recent book you haven't read yet but which you feel might become a classic based on reputation alone. This was the one I found hardest. I'm going to say the Neapolitan novels by Elena Ferrante, which is My Brilliant Friend and all the rest of them. I haven't read these and I don't really think I have that much interest in reading them, but they have been beloved by so many people in the last few years and have had such sort of wide influence and such staying power that they seem like the kind of books that are going to be around for a fair while. And finally, question 5 is pick a favourite book you want to save for your grandchildren or your friends' grandchildren to read in 50 years' time. So I have 2 picks for this, though the first is a series. The first is His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, which wasn't my favourite children's series when I was a child, but is definitely my favourite children's series now. Not that it's exactly a children's series, but it's one of those amazing series that you could read as a child of 11 and appreciate, and then you can read as an adult and appreciate on a whole different level, but with like equally worthwhile enjoyment and understanding. And they're brilliant, brilliant books. Nick and I are currently listening to Northern Lights on audiobook. This is my 3rd read and Nick's like 14th. They're his favourite series, and it's a brilliant, brilliant series, one I love so much, and one that has such like emotional power and is about so many important themes to do with growing up and coming of age, relationships, innocence, and why knowledge and the loss of innocence isn't necessarily a bad thing, and so many like complicated issues to do with religion and free will and other worlds, and also the fact that in this other world in which the main character lives, there are demons who are like your soul animals who accompany you everywhere. There are so many amazing things about this series. I think they're wonderful books, and I think the themes that they deal with will go on to be relevant for a long time, and also they're so beautifully, brilliantly written that children and adults will enjoy them for many, many, many years to come. And then another one I wanted to mention, which is not a children's book, but I think is fairly accessible for teenagers and sort of younger adults, is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Mostly because I felt like I had to mention this somewhere, because I feel like I want this book to go on to be a classic, because it is kind of a book about the end of the world. It is kind of an apocalyptic story, but it's also a story about hope and people surviving in terrible circumstances, and I think that is beautiful and wonderful, and I think that everyone should read it. And I hope that it will be a classic in the future because it deals with such important themes and because it is so wonderfully brilliant. There we have it, that is the Future Classics book tag. I'm going to tag Carolyn's Reading Rambles and Rachel's Reading Corner and also Catadactyl and Valerie from Valerie's. Let me know down in the comments what books you think will be classics in the future. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.